Hi, welcome to the third lecture on Hamlet in a series of 12 lectures. In the last lecture, you may have seen the curtains moving behind me. That was not a ghost. That was my doggy Isabu. There's a perfectly reasonable natural explanation for that particular occurrence. And later in the video, when one of my other doggies started barking, that was Lily Love, and she wasn't barking at a ghost, a noise from the outside that was produced by a ghost. Again, it was there's a perfectly natural explanation for that, for what happened. It was the male arriving. So that brings us to today's lecture and to Hamlet's meeting with the ghost. Today we are going to meet a real ghost. Well, a fictional ghost in Act 1, Scene 5 of Hamlet. And this raises the question of just what is a supernatural being doing in this play that I have been arguing is a realistic tragedy, not a romantic tragedy, and why has Shakespeare introduced the ghost? Um, I would say first off that Shakespeare is very concerned about not the supernatural. I don't think he has much interest in the supernatural. But if it does exist, I don't think he would be terribly concerned about it or interested in it. But he is interested in people who believe in the supernatural. In other words, in the romantic view of the existence of a supernatural world. And that's why I believe he's introducing the ghost in the play. As we saw in A Midsummer Night's Dream, a number of problems that are raised uh, with the belief in the supernatural. Um, it's a topic that does concern Shakespeare, and a number of problems that are raised that he raises in that play. Remember, first of all, let's begin with that definition of the supernatural. Super meaning above and beyond the natural world, that is. So, a supernatural world is a world that is above and beyond. And again, some people think of that in a simplistic way as a supernatural realm existing somewhere out there above us and beyond us in space. But actually, I would argue that it means above and beyond our ability to comprehend, because it is, if it does exist, if the supernatural world did exist, then it would be above and beyond human beings' ability to comprehend, because it would not be part of the natural world, not part of the physical world, and we are embedded in the physical world. That is all we know. So by its very definition, the idea that anybody could speak about the supernatural world, you can see there's a problem there because nobody can really know anything about it since we're all uh, trapped here in a natural world. And we recall Bottom's dream and Bottom's words that man is but an ass if he go about to expound upon my dream, the dream of coming into contact with a supernatural being, Titania, in the form of a fairy, the fairy queen Titania. So there is a problem. First of all, if you think about what supernatural means. Um, Also, the moment that you think about a supernatural entity or being, uh, it really doesn't to describe it as a supernatural being. It has no explanatory power, if you will. Um, Instead, it raises a host of questions rather than explaining anything. So I think I use the example of the Greek god Zeus. Many of the ancient Greeks were romantics, and when they witnessed the phenomenon of lightning, thunder, and lightning, they imagined that it was caused by a supernatural being, a god called Zeus. And they believed that they had solved the problem of, explaining thunder and lightning. But as we can see, it really doesn't explain anything. It instead just brings to mind a number of questions, raises, as I said before, a host of questions that remain unanswered. First of all, how do you define a supernatural being? What is a supernatural being? If it's physical, then it would be subject to the law of identity. We, as physical beings, everything that exists, every physical being that exists has specific characteristics that determine what it can and cannot do, what it can and cannot do. That's known as the law of identity. It's the law of limitation. And so a supernatural being, if it were a physical being, would be limited by the law of identity. It would have specific traits, and those traits would define, its capabilities. Um, Also, if it's a non-physical entity, if you define a supernatural being as a non-physical entity, then the question is just what exactly is that? You really haven't given any explanation of what it is. To say what something isn't doesn't describe what it is. And in addition to the problem of defining what a supernatural being is, you have the problem of where does it originate? How did it originate? Where did it come from? Did it simply poof into existence? After all, a supernatural being, one would assume, was a complex entity, and we know that complex beings such as ourselves, we can trace our origins. Each of us individually, we can trace back to our biological origins, and we can trace our species through the evolutionary, down the evolutionary tree, through our biological uh, uh, beginnings, and from there to our chemical origins, and finally to our physical origins. Finally, we find ourselves once again reduced to being space and energy bits and matter bits. That's what we're comprised of. So our origins are very simple, and complexity arises out of simplicity. But a complex, supernatural being would have to be a complex being. And so, therefore, it doesn't explain exactly, well, where did it originate from? Where did it come from? How did this complexity arise? In addition to not explaining, not being able to define what a supernatural being is or where it originated, you have the problem of how does it interact with a physical world? If it is a non physical entity, then just exactly how would it interact with a physical world? You remember you learned in your physics class in high school, I assume, that one of the first things you learned about uh, matter is that in order for any two things to interact, they have to have like properties, such as volume or weight or uh, uh, speed, velocity, mass. So, in order for any two things to interact with each other, they have to have like properties. And a supernatural being that was non physical would not have any physical properties. So, how exactly would it interact with the physical world? That would be a question that would be raised too. And then, of course, there's the problem of evidence. Um, what evidence is there to support uh, this belief in a supernatural being that it actually exists? There certainly can't be any scientific evidence because science deals with the natural world. And philosophy, of course, philosophical truths are derived from scientific observations. So, although many people have tried to put forward philosophical arguments explaining the existence, for example, of a God, none of those arguments ultimately has been found to be sound. Uh, um, so there's a problem with providing evidence. Um, Traditionally speaking, there have been two way two two ways that most romantics think they have evidence of supernatural beings exist. And the first, of course, is a religious text. We saw with the Midsummer Night's Dream again, however, when Bottom alludes to the Christian Bible and to the story of Paul and Paul's revelation, we saw that Shakespeare here is uh, he's raising this issue, this problem of believing in uh, the supernatural based on a religious text. For example, you'd first have to prove that a God exists before you could argue that he inspired poets or prophets or patriarchs to write a text proving his existence. So that's known in philosophy as begging the question. You're assuming in your conclusion what you're trying, or in one of your premises, what you're trying to prove in your conclusion. So there's a problem with saying that a book, particularly books, these religious texts, they don't offer any scientific data or facts, and certainly they don't make philosophical arguments for the existence uh, of whichever God uh, the text is supporting. Uh, Basically, the books are simply stories told by human beings. And so there again is more evidence that such a being, beyond a rational doubt, would not exist, because we know that human beings have a tendency to, if to tell stories and to imagine things that don't exist. We recall Theseus in A Midsummer Night's Dream, his speech in Act 5, where he imagines the poet who glances from the poet's eye in a fine frenzy rolling, glances from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven, and as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen gives to them a local habitation. The poet's pen turns out of every nothing, turns them to shapes and gives to them a local habitation and a name, which is what Shakespeare's reminding us in A Midsummer Night's Dream, that the fairies inhabiting the dream are not real, that he's using them symbolically to underscore to the problems associated with belief in the supernatural. Um, he gives he gives his fictional fairies names: Titania, Oberon, Puck, and a local habitation, the woods just outside of Athens. But he creates them out of his imagination bodies forth these beings out of an airy nothing, and he reminds us of this airy nothing. Um, yeah, and speaking of A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare also pointed out several other difficulties, other issues that are raised with belief in the supernatural. And one is that uh, as we said before, it doesn't have any explanatory power. It doesn't explain lightning or thunder. There's no explanation forthcoming simply by positing a supernatural being called Zeus, who is the god of lightning and thunder. And in A Midsummer Night's Dream, we have the mischievous fairy Puck, and Puck is blamed for a number of natural phenomena that occur in the play. And Shakespeare's reminding us that to say, if you find a sock missing in your dryer, and then you tell yourself, well, it must have been Puck, that mischievous elf, that mischievous fairy, that little imp. He must have stolen my other sock. Well, you really haven't explained what happened. So these natural phenomena can be explained rationally rather than, and they certainly can't be explained using a supernatural explanation. And in addition, another concern of Shakespeare's is that people, the romantics who hold a belief in the supernatural, that they often they spend a great deal of their lives living in fear. They be superstition. The moment someone posits an invisible entity with powers is the moment that one has to begin to fret and worry and be concerned whether or not those entities will harm them. And so romantics can spend a great deal of their time and energy and resources uh, trying to placate these fairies or gods or ghosts, and trying to make sure that they won't be harmed by them. It's one reason why Puck is called Robin Goodfellow by those romantics who believe in him. They won't. They're trying to, get on Puck's good side. They don't want Puck to hurt them in any way. And this idea of, it's this idea of the waste that of time and energy and in trying to appease the gods. Just think of the resources that go into, building temples to the gods, for example. So Shakespeare's concerned certainly about the idea that it leads to this superstitious kind of anxiety and fear. And also, just on just opposite of that, in A Midsummer Night's Dream, if you'll recall, the fairy blessing at the end of the play, many romantics who believe in the supernatural world, they imagine that they're blessed by this whatever particular supernatural being, and that being blessed protects them and keeps them from harm and uh, makes certain that their lives will ultimately end happily. And it can cause people to take great risks uh, 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 with their thinking that they will not run into any harm or danger despite the risks they're taking. We saw that with the fairy blessing and the controversial issue of people having children, the risks they take in bringing new feeling conscious beings into the world. And yet they somehow believe that their children will not be harmed. The natural diseases and the natural disasters in the world, the birth defects, the accidents, the abuse, the uh, children being victims of uh, of people and children, some children growing up to be victimizers, to be abusers, and then of course you've got the problem of loss and dying and death as well. So yes, number of problems raised with belief in the supernatural, and it's of great concern to Shakespeare. Again, he's not interested in the supernatural in and of itself, but he's interested rather in people who hold belief in the supernatural world, because beliefs lead to behaviors. People act on their beliefs, and holding uh, these supernatural beliefs can do a lot of damage, cause a lot of unnecessary harm in the world. Shakespeare is well aware of this in his day. This is why this topic is of great concern to him. You see it in this play, just as we did in A Midsummer Night's Dream. But in Shakespeare's time, of course, as I mentioned last time, medieval Europe uh, uh, it's a is a Christian world, just like the Hamletian world. It's a Christian world, and Shakespeare's living in a time when there's a war uh, being waged between Protestants and Catholics, and thousands upon thousands of people are being brutally killed because of their opposing beliefs and they each believe in a different set of beliefs concerning the supernatural world. And also, of course, there's the persecution of people who, in Shakespeare's time, of people who belong to minority religions, persecution of the Jews, for example. And then we have women by the hundreds of thousands who are being persecuted because they're believed to be witches and in league with a devil. And so women are brutally tortured and killed. Um, they're drowned, they're burned at the stake, they're stoned to death. Just the horror that is unimaginable. I think it's close to 500,000 women were killed over a number of centuries during the medieval period. You probably heard of the Salem witchcraft trials, for example. Yeah, and most of these people were women. There were some men, of course, who were accused of witchcraft, but most were women. And then, of course, there are the Inquisitions. Shakespeare would have been familiar with the torture and the torment uh, that the Inquisitions produced. And the destruction of whole civilizations, Shakespeare would have known about the Christian Crusades, for example, and the destruction of Egypt. And in the New World to come, the destruction of whole civilizations here on both continents, North and South America, the Native Americans, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayans, etc. I mean, just endless. It's a rather bloody history. The problem is one person holds belief in the supernatural, that one person can do quite a bit of damage, as we see in this play. To some extent, that's part of the problem here for Hamlet is his belief in the supernatural. And uh, when a group of people, a large group of people, when who hold a particular set of beliefs, when they become organized, they can suddenly become quite a serious threat to others who, if others don't subscribe to their uh, particular views. It's the idea of might makes right rather than reason uh, should dictate how we govern ourselves. Our 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 principles should be based on uh, the facts and the truths, those that are derived from those facts. So it's a great concern to Shakespeare, this belief in the supernatural world. And that brings us to his ghost. What is this ghost doing in the play? Well, again, as I argued in A Midsummer Night's Dream, that the fairies are being used symbolically. The fairies don't really exist. They are an airy nothing created by the poet, but they're used simply to show what kinds of problems, what sorts of issues are raised uh, when people start holding these beliefs, supernatural beliefs. And here again, I think Shakespeare's doing the same thing, but with a twist. Because here in this play, uh, Hamlet meets the ghost, and Shakespeare, I think, what he's doing here is um, it's if you will, it's a kind of thought experiment Shakespeare's putting forward here. I don't think the play is in any way supporting the view that the supernatural world exists and the ghosts exist. But it's a kind of thought experiment. Shakespeare, for the romantic sitting in the audience, I think Shakespeare's saying, imagine that a ghost, a supernatural being, does appear before a character in a play, Hamlet and the several of the guards and Horatio. Imagine that a supernatural being appears. Just what exactly could we know about this supernatural being? This raises the issue of the other mind. What exactly could we know? If you recall, the problem of the other mind in A Midsummer Night's Dream is the problem that exists between human beings, among human beings, between lovers, for example, that since we don't have access into other people's brains, we can never really ascertain for certain, truly know for certain, right, uh, what they are thinking or what they are feeling. Um, and that's a problem. Even if someone is telling you the truth, you might still suspect that they're lying to you, which is why lying, of course, is such a is such a bad thing to do, because most people know that lying is wrong, but if you ask them why is lying wrong, they'll respond, "Well, I was told that it was wrong." Uh, right? Mama and Daddy told me don't lie. But if you think about it, when someone lies to you, they're really giving you an inaccurate description of the world around you, an inaccurate uh, description of reality. And we act on what we think is reality, what we think is the truth. And so, not having that precise, that true, that exact description of what is occurring, what reality is, that can cause harm. And so that's why it's so important that people be honest with each other. Um, and so this problem of knowing the other mind that exists between human beings. Remember in A Midsummer Night's Dream that Lysander and Demetrius, both under the influence of the magical flower juice, they profess to Helena how much they, adore her and worship her and love her. And of course, she can't believe them. She doesn't believe them. She thinks she's mocking, that they're mocking her, they're ridiculing her, even though they are telling the truth because they are under the influence of the, the magical juice. and she still, yet she doesn't believe them, even no matter how much they protest, even when they challenge one another to a duel to death, to duel each other to the death in for her hand. And even Helena's best friend, Hermia cries out to Helena that she uh, doesn't understand what's going on either. But Helena doesn't believe her best friend, that she believes Hermia is lying to her. So it's very difficult to know exactly what other people are thinking. That's why we depend upon others telling us the truth, being honest, being open and direct with us. And here we have a twist on this idea of the problem of the other mind. Here, Shakespeare says, imagine a supernatural being appears before you. How can you know anything about this supernatural being other than it's a supernatural being? How can you know what it is, or if it's speaking the truth to you, or what its true intentions are, what is its purpose? You can't really have access to a supernatural world, even if you were to be visited by a supernatural being. And so many people in Shakespeare's day and today believe that they know what their particular, in this case, in this play, the Christian God, right? They know what their God wants, how their God wants them to behave, and how their God wants them to conduct their lives and uh, uh, think and so forth. So it's a problem here. How can you know? How can you have access uh, to, not in this case, not another human being's brain, but how can you have access into the mind? I'll use the word mind for a supernatural being because I can't imagine it would be a brain. Then it would be limited, right? Because brains deteriorate over time. Right, neurons die over time. So it can't, a supernatural being, I would imagine, couldn't have a brain, so it must have a mind. And a mind, the word mind has this suggestion of something non physical, something mysterious, something separate from the body, much like a soul or a spirit. So, yeah, that's the problem. How could you know anything, really? How could you trust anything this supernatural being was telling you? How could you know just exactly what the supernatural being was and what the purpose, what the intentions of the supernatural being were? The intentions were of the supernatural being. And this raises another deterministic feature that I think you could explore in your essay. Why does Hamlet delay in seeking vengeance for his father, um, uh, his father's death? And here, I think this is a reason that Hamlet is fully conscious of. Unlike many of the other reasons we've looked at, Hamlet is aware. Because remember this, you're going to, if you haven't already read ahead of this, or if you've read the play before, you realize that many times Hamlet pauses and he asks himself, he's trying to understand his own, who's there, right? He's trying to understand why he himself is delaying. He can't figure out just why he's not following the ghost's injunction uh, to seek revenge on Claudius. And uh, here we have an illustration, an example, a cause that I think Hamlet is aware of. He mentions it several times in the play. But many of the causal factors behind Hamlet's delay are operating at the subconscious level. He's unaware of those conflicts. But let's turn to where we meet the ghost. And I'm on page 1412 in your anthology. This is Act 1, Scene 5. And Hamlet first sees the ghost near the top of the page at line 39 or so. The ghost enters. So, just to remind you what we're considering here, this is a fifth causal factor you could explore in your essay. And there's evidence here that we'll be discussing that you could use to support this cause, this particular reason, this causal feature. This is the problem the Hamlet has, right? Hamlet, he's unsure. He's suspicious of the ghost's true nature, of the ghost's true status. Can he trust the ghost? Is the ghost trustworthy? Can he accept what the ghost is saying? And this causes Hamlet to pause, to hesitate, to procrastinate in carrying out the ghost's orders. So here we have the ghost appears. Horatio cries out as the ghost enters the stage, "Look, my lord, it comes." And look at Hamlet's first response when he sees the ghost. "Angels and ministers of grace, defend us." Here again, this idea of these supernatural entities, perhaps they have some sort of power over us, and they can cause quite a great deal of anxiety and fear in people who believe in them, the romantics who believe in these beings. And so there's, you know, one of the film adaptations of the play, the one starring Mel Gibson and directed by Rossellini, uh, when the director has Gibson playing the role of Hamlet, has Hamlet cross himself when he sees the ghost for protection because of his fear. At the same time, however, Gibson moves toward the camera, so you see Hamlet's conflict here. He wants to trust the ghost. He wants to believe because the ghost appears in the image of his father. The ghost looks like his father. So he longs to speak with the ghost. He wants to trust the ghost. But at the same time, he's fearful. He's unsure of what it is he's seeing here. And he calls upon the irony here. He's calling upon, well, I don't know if it's an irony. He's calling upon the good supernatural beings, the angels and the ministers of grace to defend him. Angels and ministers of grace, defend us. Be thou a spirit of health or goblin damned. Be thou a spirit of health or goblin damned. Is the ghost good, a spirit of health, or is the ghost bad, a goblin damned? How can you know? How can Hamlet know? That's the question here. Is it a good ghost or is it a bad ghost? Can you trust the ghost? Is it an honest ghost? What's the true nature of this ghost? What's this ghost's character? Is this ghost something to suspect, to be suspicious of, or uh, can it be trusted? Be thou a spirit of health or goblin damned. Um, he repeats the same question, only he phrases it differently here in the next line. Bring with thee airs from heaven or blast from hell. Heaven or hell? Do you come? Are you here? Are you an emissary from the Christian God? Is that possible? Could the Christian God, after all, the Christian God is an all powerful being, so one can't imagine that the ghost could be allowed to roam free on the earth without the Christian God's uh, permission. Um, so, is the ghost an emissary from the Christian God? Who knows? Perhaps the ghost is the Christian God himself, come in the form of Hamlet's father. How can we know? What questions? More questions are raised here than are answered. The only thing we can truly answer is that this ghost is a supernatural being. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we can know. Can we even know that there's a supernatural realm? Uh, uh, I don't see how we could answer that particular question. But bring with thee airs from heaven or blast from hell. Be thy, again, a third, Hamlet phrases a third way. Shakespeare, remember, when Shakespeare repeats, and again, by Shakespeare, I mean the play, when Shakespeare's plays uh, repeat words or phrases or ideas, and they're calling our attention to uh, the importance here. In the next line, third time, Hamlet asks, "Be thy intents wicked or charitable?" So you've got, be thou a spirit of health or goblin damned. Bring with thee airs from heaven or blast from hell. Be thy intents wicked or charitable? Which is it? Which is it? Uh, this is a problem, and it's going to cause Hamlet to delay. Should he move forward? Should he believe the ghost? Can anything the ghost says be trusted? Thou comest in such a questionable shape that I will speak to thee. And circle that word questionable, because here again, Hamlet, interesting, it's just part of who he is, it's part of his program. I said we human beings are part of the realists would argue that we human beings are part of the mechanical universe, and therefore we're just cogs in the machine. We too are robots. Of course, the difference between us and robots, difference between all conscious sentient organisms and robots, is that we organisms can feel. We can experience pain and pleasure, or I did make the argument in class, pain or the elimination of pain, right? The various states of dissatisfaction. The question is there really truly such a thing as genuine pleasure, or is it simply uh, a lessening of uh, states of dissatisfaction? Interesting. Uh, but anyway, back to this idea of a pun, this questionable shape. Thou comest in such a questionable shape that I will speak to thee. Of course, questionable on the one hand means suspicious, maybe not to be trusted, doubtful as regards, maybe the truth or uh, the truth or the quality of your appearance, your shape. Um, but also the fact that the ghost appears to look, or the ghost comes in the shape of Hamlet's father. Hamlet wants to question it. He has a psychological desire, need. We know how, right? We know Hamlet's uh, uh, emotional attachment, his psychological attachment to his father. I should say this idealized image of his father. So he certainly wants to question this thing that comes in the shape of his father. And I think this is also a way of Shakespeare reminding us that this ghost that we're seeing sitting in the audience. Don't imagine that somehow this play is subscribing to the romantic view of existence, of the universe, that the questionable shape uh, is questionable because perhaps we can see that it's an actor on a stage. Many critics, uh, well, I don't know about many, but some critics, some scholars argue that Shakespeare actually played the role of the ghost in the productions of Hamlet, that he would play the role of the ghost. It's a nice idea, isn't it? Because it would be Shakespeare's way of sort of winking at the audience and reminding them, hey, I'm not a real ghost. This is a fiction here. And I'm really the author of the play. I've invented this ghost here just to remind you that. You are in a fictional world. Again, this undermining this idea that this is a romantic view of the world that the play is offering us. No, I would say the ghost is being used specifically as I said earlier, a kind of thought experiment to raise this issue, this problem of belief in the supernatural. And So this idea of you come in such a questionable shape, Shakespeare, you can imagine him turning to the audience and winking at the audience because the ghost, of course, is in full suit of armor, but his visor, his beaver is up, so you can see Shakespeare. And I imagine many in the audience would know Shakespeare. Um, and it sort of corresponds to Theseus' speech again in A Midsummer Night's Dream, right? The lines that I botched earlier, the poet's eye in a fine frenzy rolling doth glance from heaven to hell, from earth to heaven, and as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, gives to them a shape. I messed it up again, but gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. We talked about how Shakespeare, he's basically saying there are two types of poets, the two types of artists, the good artist, the bad artist. The good artist is the one who does present us with a realistic view of the world and gives us this accurate depiction, description, a model for our brain, right? Because we don't live in reality, we live in a model of reality, this kind of facsimile of reality, right? We live in here inside our brains. So we have to try to come to an accurate understanding of the world out here by modeling it right accurately using our ability to reason. And so the bad poet whose eye is in a fine frenzy rolling, gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name, creates these fairies in the play, for example, because the poet actually believes in such supernatural entities. But Shakespeare, on the other hand, you could read those same lines, gives the poet's eye gives to airy nothing. Shakespeare reminds us it's an airy nothing. The good poet, the good artist, doesn't present these supernatural beings. The realistic artist, right? The realist doesn't present the supernatural world as as actually existing in the universe. So, at any rate, this idea of a questionable shape, I can just imagine. It's a nice thought, isn't it? Even if we can only conjecture. Did Shakespeare play the role of the ghost? But it's a nice thought, thinking that yes, here was Shakespeare, you know, sort of what's the expression? It was just sort of letting us know, letting us in on what he's doing here. Thou comest in such a questionable shape that I will speak to thee. I'll call thee Hamlet, king, father, royal Dane. Oh, answer me. So again, we see Hamlet is has this very strong psychological need, this desire to speak with this ghost because it does come in the shape of his father. So on the one hand, he wants to trust it. He wants to believe that it's an angel of a spirit of help. On the other hand, he suspects, he doubts, he fears that it might be a goblin damned. And as do the other soldiers. Look at halfway down the page. Look what Horatio says. That when the ghost beckons to Hamlet, the ghost says, "It beckons you to go away with it, as if some sorry, my eyes, as if some impartment did desire to you alone." Interesting that the ghost wants to speak with Hamlet, have a private communication, a tete-a-tete with Hamlet. He wants to speak with Hamlet privately where nobody else can hear what's being said. Um, and Marcellus, again, underscores, when Marcellus speaks, he underscores that thought. Look with what courteous action it waves you to a more removed ground. So the ghost wants to get Hamlet off alone. So yes, Marcellus and Horatio and previously a few of the other guards, they have witnessed the ghost, just as Hamlet witnesses the ghost here. So we are to believe that the ghost exists. We're not to imagine that somehow these ghosts, these guards, are delusional. But again, Shakespeare here is he's toying with this idea that just because several people, even a large number of people, billions of people, just because billions of people subscribe to a particular belief, a particular God, for example, doesn't mean that that God actually exists, right? Just because even if everybody were to believe it, that would not be proof, right, that it actually would exist. You'd have to have scientific proof, not simply people's belief uh, in that. So here it's kind of an interesting thing he's doing by uh, having others see the ghost, but he wants only Hamlet. The ghost wants only to speak with Hamlet. Interesting why he wants to do that. We'll talk about that later. But it waves you to a more removed ground, but do not go with it. Notice that Marcellus too, like Hamlet's opening lines, angels and ministers of grace defend us. Marcellus too is superstitious. He's worried, he's fearful that maybe this is a goblin damned. But do not go with. And Horatio agrees with Marcellus. He says, no, by no means. And look what Hamlet says, it will not speak, then I will follow it. So the ghost is refusing to speak. So here, a third time, the ghost is adamant. The ghost insists on having a private conference with Hamlet. He's not going to speak in front of the others. And the others are warning Hamlet, do not go with it. But Hamlet wishes to speak with it. Uh, his desires are overwhelming his ability to think clearly and to be rational here, because the ghost, perhaps the ghost does have bad intentions here. But Hamlet says, uh, uh, why? Hamlet says, it will not speak, then I will follow it. And Horatio says, do not, my lord. And Hamlet responds, why? What should be the fear? I do not set my life at a pin's fee. And for my soul, what can it do to that, being a thing immortal as itself? Uh, yeah, that's true. Hamlet doesn't care about his life in this world, his physical life, but I don't think he is thinking rationally, even for a romantic here, believing that his soul is immortal and therefore it can't be, destroyed. But remember, Hamlet believes in Hamlet is a Christian, so he believes in the Christian hell, and his soul, though it might not be destroyed, something far worse is that it could be tortured and tormented for all eternity in that you know um, uh, uh, Christian hell here. So yeah, that might be something he might wish to consider. It might be something he should fear. It waves me forth again. I'll follow it. Notice it's waving Hamlet forth. I'll follow it. And Horatio, look what Horatio says next. This is interesting, isn't it? What if it tempt you toward the flood, my lord, or to the dreadful summit of the cliff that beetles o'er his base into the sea, and there assumes some other horrible form which might deprive your sovereignty of reason and draw you into madness? Think of it, and circle that word reason, which might deprive your sovereignty of reason. Your sovereignty of reason. Uh, Deprive you, the prince, your sovereignty of reason, but also your sovereignty of reason, right? Your reason that should rule how you how you think and how you act. Your reason should be that's touching now the point of human skill. Reason becomes the marshal to your will. Your reason should govern your desires, right? You've got to keep the animal in check. You've got to, right? I think I used the idea that you want your intelligence to control your desires, not vice versa. You don't want your desires to rule over your intelligence here. This idea of reason. Once again, Shakespeare, as I've stated emphatically again and again, Shakespeare is concerned about our capacity for uh, reasoning and our failure to use that capacity to take advantage of that. It's our drives, our needs, our wants, our psychological wishes and wants, and our cultural dependencies, our cultural addictions, what we've grown addicted to, what brings us pleasure and enjoyment. Uh, it's our biological drives too, often that interfere with our ability to think clearly, for us to become selfish and greedy and uh, the ego that can take over, and the animal in us can be unleashed and can run away with our intelligence. And this is frightening to Shakespeare. It's a great concern to him. But Horatio too fears that the ghost, is some sort of sh- shapeshifter, perhaps, that it could, maybe it's going to deprive Hamlet of the ability to think clearly, to be rational. And I would argue that Hamlet is slowly going to be drawn into madness, and this is one of the causal factors here, is the ghost's appearance and not being able to know just who this ghost is and what this ghost wants. So Hamlet will not listen to Marcellus and will not listen to Horatio. He insists, and look what he says on page 1413 at line 85. By heaven, they're actually they're forcefully trying, they're physically grabbing hold of Hamlet and trying to restrain him, trying to prevent him from going off from with the ghost. Such is their fear, that this ghost may be a goblin Dan, may be perhaps even remember, Orthodox Christianity holds this belief in an all-powerful evil demon called Satan or Lucifer, the devil. Perhaps this ghost is the devil himself. How are we to know? It's the Christian devil himself, come to tempt Hamlet into madness, into committing suicide, perhaps, and therefore damning his soul for all eternity. Remember the problem for the Christian in wanting to, the Christian who longs for death, Christian, someone like Hamlet, who longs to end his life. But Hamlet will have none of it, and he says, unhand me, gentlemen. By heaven, I'll make a ghost of him that lets me. I say, away. And he turns to the ghost, go on, I'll follow thee. So here's fascinating again that Hamlet, he's so programmed. I mean, his skills in language and with words is punning here in this moment of this excitement, emotional excitement. And even in the depths of despair, you'll find him still playing these word games, punning and so forth. But he's going to make a ghost of him that prevents him. And Hamlet will make a ghost of anyone who prevents him from having this private meeting with the ghost. So we can turn to Act 1, Scene 5 here, where Hamlet does have a conversation with the ghost. And the ghost and Hamlet now, they're alone on stage. And at line 7 or 8, Hamlet says, stop, I'll go no further. And let's see, we find out why the ghost has come. The ghost says, let's see, I'm trying to find. Well, let's just start at the beginning of the scene. I think that'll be easier. Hamlet says, whither wilt thou lead me? Speak, I'll go no further. And the ghost says, mark me. That's my impersonation of a ghost. Mark me. And Hamlet says, I will. My hour is almost come. And Hamlet says later at line 7 here, speak, I am bound to hear. And the ghost says, so art thou to revenge when thou shalt hear. What? Hamlet wants to hear what? Revenge. What is he talking about? And here the ghost explains, I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night, and for the day confined to fast and fires, till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away. But that I am forbid to tell the secrets of my prison house, I could a tale unfold, whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul, freeze thy young blood. Gives you the shivers, doesn't it? Sounds as if the ghost is in a place. It sounds like the Catholic purgatory, doesn't it? Remember, Catholics believe in a place called purgatory, a kind of waiting room for spirits and souls um, who must uh, where they're confined until they're they are permitted to ascend into heaven until, as the ghost says here, till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away. Uh, Interestingly enough, a few critics have argued that this proves that Shakespeare himself was Catholic because here the ghost is describing a region, a supernatural region that is, although the ghost never calls it purgatory, it certainly sounds like the Catholic purgatory here. Of course, we have to remember, which is what I think the critics forget, is that the action in Hamlet is taking place during, uh, uh, prior to Shakespeare's day in medieval times when all of Europe was ruled by the Catholic Church. So, yes, I mean, I would imagine that the characters in this play are Catholic. Uh, it it would seem to me that that would just be, you know, rationally deduce that, I would imagine, from that it's an educated guess here that you could support by simply the time period in which the play takes place. But why? Why would Shakespeare? Shakespeare, of course, is living in Protestant England. Elizabeth I on the throne is a Protestant, and of course we have the Catholics and the Protestants warring with each other, killing each other over which Christian God is actually sitting on the throne, the Protestant God or the Catholic God, if you will. Um, but imagine in Shakespeare's day, remember, if you're sitting in the audience in Shakespeare's day, well, the chances are that you are probably a romantic and you probably subscribe to you probably are a Christian, and you're probably a Protestant, I would imagine. If you're a Catholic, but at any rate, if you're a Catholic sitting in the audience watching this play, then you're going to have a tendency, yes, listen to this ghost Catholic. Obviously, this ghost is Hamlet. Listen to this ghost Hamlet. Obviously, this ghost is a good ghost. You can trust him because he's describing purgatory. And we know, as good Catholics, that purgatory does actually exist. But if you're a Protestant sitting in the audience, what are you going to say? You're going to say, don't trust what this ghost has to say. This ghost does not bring with it, what does Hamlet say? This ghost doesn't bring airs from heaven. It brings blasts from hell. Because Protestants, of course, don't believe in such a region, such a realm as purgatory. So I would argue that this is Shakespeare's way again, a very subtle way of underscoring that we can't really know anything about this supernatural being. Can we trust it or not? So Shakespeare's playing this kind of game here. Yes, Shakespeare's aware that Catholics believe in a purgatory and Protestants do not, but Shakespeare's also aware that he's got an audience filled with Catholics and Protestants, and Catholics are going to perhaps have a tendency to go along with what the ghost has to say, whereas the Protestants are going to think, no, this ghost, don't listen to it, whatever it tells you. Uh, this ghost is a being an entity to be doubtful of, suspect. But at any rate here, um, the ghost says at line 24 or 5 here, list, list, oh, list, which is a poetic way of saying, listen to what I have to say. The ghost reiterates, list, if thou didst ever thy dear father love. And Hamlet cries out, oh, God. And here we've seen this before, right? With Gertrude, when she speaks to Hamlet, when she's trying to persuade Hamlet, she says, uh, lose not thy let not thy mother lose her prayers. She plays the mother card, and here the ghost is playing the father card, if you will. Now, on the one hand, it could be that the ghost is the ghost of Hamlet's father, and what he says is true. I am your father, and if you love me, then you'll listen to what I have to say. But on the other hand, the ghost perhaps is a demon or a goblin damned or the devil himself come to tempt Hamlet. So maybe the ghost is knowing that Hamlet, worships his father. Perhaps Hamlet is going to be more apt to listen to what the ghost have to say and what the ghost has to say if the ghost reminds Hamlet, if the ghost comes in the shape of his father and starts just before he tells Hamlet what he wants him to do, reminds him that I'm your father. Yeah, effective way to persuade someone, particularly someone like Hamlet who has such a deep, deep psychological attachment, an addiction, if you will, to this idealized image that he's created, right, in his mind for his father. This idealized image that he has of his father. So the ghost is in the form, the shape. He appears like Hamlet's father, maybe because the ghost is the ghost of Hamlet's father. The ghost can be trusted. That's the ghost's true status. That's who the ghost is, and what the ghost has to say is true. Or maybe the ghost is simply, remember the shapeshifter. Horatio has just told us that perhaps this thing, right, what are the exact words that he used? They can assume some other horrible form. This is a demon assuming the form, the shape of Hamlet's father to tempt Hamlet's soul to eternal damnation. Remember, as a Christian, Hamlet believes in this entity called a soul. This non-physical entity. Hamlet is a dualist. He believes in addition to the body, there's something called a soul, which is why it's not enough that his body dissolve and thaw and melt and resolve itself into a dew, because he has the soul to worry about. So, yes, here we have the ghost. Is the ghost, telling the truth here, or is the ghost lying to Hamlet? And Hamlet cries out, "Oh God!" And I wonder here which God he's crying out to. Because, as I said, Hamlet does tend to revere his father, worship his father like a god. Remember, Hamlet calls his father a Hyperion. So, is he calling out, "Oh God," to his father? Is he calling out to his heavenly father because he doesn't know how to act? It's interesting here what the play is doing. And the ghost says, "Revenge his foul and most unnatural murder." There it is. There's the order. There's the injunction. Here's what you must do. Revenge his foul and most unnatural murder. And Hamlet cries out, "Murder." In shock. Hamlet's in shock here. Murder most foul, as in the best it is, but this most foul, strange, and unnatural. And here in these lines, I think we have yet another causal factor, another deterministic feature for Hamlet's procrastination, for Hamlet's delay. But now this particular factor is operating at the subconscious level. And I think that's why Shakespeare puts this phrase, "as in the best it is," within commas here, within a kind of parenthetical phrase here, right? It's kind of a side. Murder most foul, as in the best it is. What does that mean? The ghost is saying murder is foul, murder is wrong. He was murdered. The ghost of Hamlet's father. The ghost is saying, if you can trust the ghost is saying that Hamlet's father was murdered, and murder is most foul, as in the best it is. No matter how you might try to justify it, how you might try to rationalize it, murder is wrong. Murder is foul, as in the best it is. For whatever reason, it's wrong. And we're reminded again of Hamlet's Christian upbringing. And we're reminded of one of the commandments. For Protestants, it's the sixth commandment: "Thou shalt not kill." That is the moral law. Remember, morality is a term that romantics use. Morality is morals are a set of laws that are to be followed because an authority figure gives you those laws and says, don't question. You're not to question the authority figure. You're simply to do as the authority figure says. In this case, the Christian God, the authority figure, has given a set of laws. I think there are well over 600 laws in the Old Testament alone, a set of laws that the Christian is to obey and not to question, simply to act on them because it is the moral law. Now, in contrast to that, the realist subscribes to ethics, and ethics are beliefs that are built up based on reason, how one should conduct oneself, how one should behave towards others, based on based on reason, rather than some authority figures. So it's the idea that uh, even an authority figure who's making an argument, the realist would say ultimately you should not listen to the argument because it's coming from someone in a position of authority, right? For example, I told you I'm the teacher in this course and I'm in a position of authority, but remember that when I make arguments that you're not to believe them because I'm the one who says so, and because I'm in this position, and because you should believe me and not question me, that when I make an argument, you have to look at the argument that I'm making. And of course, you can challenge that argument because it's the argument that has to stand. It should be able to stand on its own without any authority figure behind it. So here we have the moral law, a law given by in this case, the Christian God, thou shalt not kill. And we're reminded of it in the ghost aside here in the word, in the phrase within commas here, as in the murder is most foul, as in the best it is. Thou shalt not kill. Period. That's the law. No exceptions. It's not thou shalt not kill unless it's in self defense. No. The Christian, remember, is supposed to love. Orthodox Christianity teaches Christians that they are all sinners and therefore they are to forgive their trespassers because they themselves wish to be forgiven, because they themselves are trespassers, and that they should love their enemy, embrace their enemy, turn the other cheek, if you will, that they should not be aggressive, that they should be, it's the meek who shall inherit the earth. It's those who are humble, those who submit, those who endure suffering, those whose faith is tested. Um, It's thou shalt not kill, period. Not thou shalt not kill unless it's self defense or unless someone is trying to kill your loved ones, your baby, even. No, thou shalt not kill, period. That's the law. And this contradiction here, uh, what we have here is a ghost calling for Hamlet to kill, to seek revenge, to kill his uncle, calling for Hamlet to kill his uncle Claudius, and at the same time telling Hamlet that murder is most foul, as in the best it is, for whatever cause, for whatever reason. So we have a conflict here between what the ghost is ordering Hamlet to do, commanding Hamlet to do, and the action itself. But again, I don't believe Hamlet's conscious of this. Nowhere in the play can I find any evidence that Hamlet is actually conscious of this contradiction. So that's why I say it's operating at the subconscious level, and it's another reason, another cause, a deterministic factor in his delay. In avenging his father's death. Murder most foul, as in the best it is. And then we hear what has occurred. The ghost tells Hamlet at line 38, "But know, thou noble youth, the serpent that did sting thy father's life now wears his crown." Notice the metaphor. Claudius is being described here as a serpent, and we're reminded once again of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Um, and the serpent representing here the evil presence within the garden, and the temptation here. You can ask, perhaps the ghost himself is a kind of serpent here that's tempting Hamlet. Um, and we're reminded too, on the other hand, we're reminded that the king uh, uh, was, or according to the ghost here, the king was killed while he was napping, while he was taking his customary nap in a garden. And so the king was attacked at this vulnerable moment when he was defenseless, when he was asleep and couldn't protect himself. The elder King Hamlet, he was attacked by his brother Claudius, according to the ghost again. Remember, let's keep an open mind here. Let's be suspicious here. Let's be skeptical as to whether or not the ghost is telling the truth. We always have to keep that in mind. But according to the ghost, uh, the um, the elder King Hamlet was poisoned in the garden while he was asleep by his brother. And this metaphor of the serpent, Claudius is being presented as the serpent here, who has entered the garden and killed an innocent, not only an innocent, but an innocent who was vulnerable, who was asleep. And again, we've talked about this before. Uh, this this is a concern to Shakespeare. The idea of murdering someone uh, while that person is asleep, when that person is unconscious, and therefore at his or her most vulnerable. We depend on a civilized world to. We need to be able to go to sleep at night and not worry about the world around us going to harm us while we're in this defenseless position. And this could, on the one hand, it could be the truth that the ghost is telling us. On the other hand, it could be simply another ploy on the ghost's part. The ghost may be wanting to, you know, he wants Hamlet to sympathize with the situation, and by telling Hamlet that he was killed while he was sleeping and vulnerable, and sleeping in his garden, and kind of innocent, stung by a serpent, and to remind Hamlet of the serpent, the devil, the evil. Uh, in the form of his uncle. Again, these could all be ploys. These could all be strategies for this ghost. If, let's say, it has nefarious intentions, its aim is to harm Hamlet or harm Hamlet's soul. That these may be the kinds of strategies that this being is using here. Something to think about. Um, and then the ghost and Hamlet cries out, "Oh, my prophetic soul, my uncle! My prophetic soul." Tends to suggest that Hamlet, all along, he's known, somehow that, yes, somehow his father, some, dark and sinister end came to his father, and that his uncle was somehow responsible for that. Is that really the case, though? I mean, there's no indication earlier that Hamlet at all suspected this. Uh, and if it were not for this ghost returning, or this ghost presence appearing before Hamlet, Claudius would have, we could say that Claudius committed the perfect crime. There are no witnesses to the crime if we're to believe that Claudius is guilty. Remember, at this point, we don't know if Claudius is guilty or not, if what the ghost is saying here is true. So probably I would say it isn't Hamlet's prophetic soul, it's Hamlet's psychological desire, right? His need. We know how much he absolutely loathes Claudius, and how convenient right? How convenient for Claudius to be the serpent in the garden. The one man he can't stand of all men on earth, the one man he absolutely despises. And here, here another way again. This could be the truth, or this could be the ghost yet again saying, "Oh, this will be easy enough. I can get this young man Hamlet, this man who worshipped his father and despised his uncle. I can get this young man. I have a way here to damn this young man's soul for all eternity. I'll just come to this young man in the disguise and the shape of his father and say, your uncle Claudius killed your father." And Hamlet, of course, would be all too willing, all too desirous to believe that, and all the more likely to obey the ghost injunction, the ghost commandment to kill Claudius and revenge uh, himself. Um, if you look at page 14, 15, and then by the way, and I'm going to, I can't, my last lecture went to some, was rather long, I know, and I do apologize. There's so much in this play, and I hate to do the play injustice by, there's so much I think that I need to discuss, and I want to also, you've got to understand too, I want to give you lots to think about for your essays as well. But at any rate, there is this long description, this horrible description of the king's death, how he died. And again, is this the truth or is this the ghost way of, eliciting sympathy from Hamlet? Hamlet is horrified at what he hears. And if you read this passage, it really is uh, uh, quite difficult to, it's usually cut from film adaptations of the play. And what a shame, because it isn't that, remember Gertrude's words, all that lives must die, passing from nature to eternity. Well, this doesn't look like a very easy passage, does it? It doesn't look like a walk in the park here. The ghost's death, quite ugly and quite painful, quite hideous. And as immediately after giving this long account of the horrors, then the ghost reminds Hamlet that he's still undergoing all kinds of horrors because of where he finds himself now, in purgatory, where his sins, all his foul crimes that he committed when he was alive are now being burnt and purged away. I mean, that sounds horrific as well. So this poor ghost, no wonder Hamlet cries out several times, "Poor ghost, alas, poor ghost." The horror is unimaginable. And the ghost cries out too, oh, horrible, most horrible." Three times, right? He cries out how the horror of it all. And then when he's got Hamlet emotionally, uh, spellbound, he says, if thou hast, I'm sorry, I'm on page 14, 15, at line 85, he says, at line 83, he says, "If thou hast nature in thee, bear it not." Again, there's the father card being played. If thou hast nature in thee, if you're a true son of mine, remember, I am your father. You will respect what it is, my wishes, what it is I want from you. You will fulfill this mission that I'm giving you. And we recall again the one of the commandments of the Christian code, the Christian canon, is to honor thy father. Honor thy father and thy mother. Respect their wishes. Obey them. Remember the Christian God. They are your father and mother because the Christian God has divinely ordained this particular hierarchy, and you are to listen to them. Their authority over you comes from the Christian God, and you don't rebel against what it is they tell you to do. You stay in line. You mind your P's and Q's, you mind your manners, you behave, and you do what they say. If thou hast nature in thee. So we have yet another. Here's a seventh causal factor for Hamlet's delay. And here we have, again, I would argue at the subconscious level that Hamlet isn't aware of this, but we certainly are. We see, on the one hand, we have the sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill. And we have the conflict of the ghost commandment, kill Hamlet, revenge. Kill your uncle in revenge. Restore the family name, restore family honor. Kill your uncle. But remember, don't kill. Killing's wrong. Killing is, one should not kill. Kill, but remember that murder is most foul, as in the best it is. So we have this conflict in the message, in the ghost message itself, which I would say this conflict is operating in Hamlet's, in his head, in his brain, but it hasn't appeared on his screen of consciousness. He's not aware of it. It's in the background here operating, just as when I'm talking to you, you see my hands move about. I'm rather fidgety because I'm a bit nervous speaking, online to the camera. So, but I'm not aware that I'm doing any of this until it flashes on my screen of consciousness. I don't know I'm fiddling and fidgeting around and what I'm doing. My brain's doing all of this. So there's much that our brain is doing, right? Obviously, at the subconscious level. And so these thoughts, I think, are part of Hamlet's upbringing, part of his deterministic upbringing, his experiences in life. He's been raised a Christian, and the idea of murder is wrong. And here he's being asked to murder, and it's his father who's asking him to honor his, so he should honor his father, respect his father. It's the sixth commandment, and but here the commandment itself, the sixth commandment, honor thy father, comes into conflict with the fifth commandment in the Christian canon. So you do not kill, thou shalt not kill. Honor thy father and thy mother, thou shalt not kill. So you've got a contradiction within the canon itself. Which commandment should Hamlet obey? Should he honor his father's request? If thou hast nature in thee, remember I'm your father, you're my son. Are you a natural son of mine? Are you a good boy? Well, what should Hamlet do? Honor his father's request? Murder is most foul, as in the best it is, or thou shalt not kill. So here we have a contradiction in the actual canon itself. At least this contradiction arises in Hamlet's particular situation. And morality can't step in and show Hamlet which is the correct choice to make here. Because morality is just the law handed down, period. There's just not based on, these scientific data that we discern in the world around, that we cull and piece together, and then to reveal these philosophical truths that help us develop this code of principles, an ethical code of principles, so that we can, handle particular situations and think about them rationally and how we should proceed. Hamlet hasn't had that advantage. He's been taught these particular laws and to obey them. And here we've got a conflict between these two laws. So this would be a seventh reason here in the opening act of the play that you could explore, that you could analyze and discuss as to why. Again, this idea of the conflict within the Christian code itself, that's this conflict in Hamlet's brain because of this contradictory message in the Christian code itself. In Hamlet's particular situation, you can see a contradiction arises here. Thou shalt not kill, and honor thy father. If thou hast nature in thee, bear it not. Let not the royal bed of Denmark be a couch of luxury and damned incest. And here the ghost, again, he could be speaking the truth uh, uh, with regard to Gertrude and her adulterous relationship with the idea that she was unfaithful to the elder King Hamlet before the king was, according to the ghost, before the king was murdered by his uncle. The ghost tells us she was unfaithful, that Claudius was an adulterate beast who seduced his queen, his all-seeming virtuous queen. She only appeared to be virtuous, but she was seduced by Hamlet's uncle. So, but remember, these are the ghost words. We don't have any proof. We don't have any scientific evidence. We weren't in the bedroom at the time. We don't know if Gertrude was unfaithful to the elder King Hamlet. But here the ghost is reminding Hamlet of this damned incest. He's bringing up this image before Hamlet's mind, right? This couch of luxury and damned incest and perhaps he's telling the truth. The ghost is telling the truth. But we also recall that Hamlet himself has mentioned the incestuous sheets that his mother posted to after the death of his father. Right? This image, Hamlet is fixated. He's obsessed with this image of his mother in bed with Claudius under the sheets, the incestuous sheets. And it fills him with revulsion. I mean, it just, it's just the horror of it, the disgust of it. And this is another way that the ghost, another ploy on the ghost's part, another way of scheming to get Hamlet to listen to what the ghost has to say, to bring this image up to Hamlet's mind. Let not, this idea of let not, if thou hast nature in thee, bear it not. There's that word not. Let not the royal bed of Denmark be a couch of luxury and damned incest. But there's always a but, isn't there? But howsoever thou pursuest this act, taint not thy mind. Again, another contradiction in the message here. How is one to kill and at the same time remain virtuous? Taint not, remain uncorrupted. Taint not one's mind. The very act of killing itself, uh, just the act in and of itself, one wonders how one can remain pure, innocent, upright in committing murder here, in this case here. How is Hamlet not to taint his mind and yet kill? It's just the ghost is saying, kill, 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 kill. But whatever you do, stay a good boy. Remain a good Christian. How is Hamlet? Remember, this is a particular problem. Taint not thy mind. Uh, Hamlet's been told to love, forgive the trespasser, love the enemy, not to kill the enemy. Right? If he wishes, right, to be forgiven for his sins, then he has to try his best to remain virtuous and innocent and uncorrupted. So, how is he to do this? How is he to kill on the one hand and, as a good Christian, not taint his mind? That's, again, another contradiction in the message itself here. And yet, here comes a third contradiction. Nor let thy soul contrive against thy mother aught. And we're reminded, honor thy mother, respect her. And respecting her means you don't harm her in any way. You don't abuse her in any way. You certainly don't kill her. You don't become, you don't commit matricide. You don't kill your mother. You don't verbally abuse her, physically abuse her in any way. Leave her to heaven. So on the one hand he's saying, kill, kill, revenge my foul murder, kill. On the other hand, murder is most foul, as in the best it is. And don't taint your mind. Remain a good, upright, virtuous Christian. And on one hand, he's saying, look, Hamlet, look. Can you see your mother there? There she is in bed with your uncle Claudius, that serpent, that adulterate beast. Look at them. Look at them engaging like animals. Look at them engaging in sex. How sinful, how horrible, how disgusting. Look at that image, Hamlet. But you know, Hamlet, be nice to your mama. Don't harm her in any way. Leave her to heaven. Leave her to her own conscience. Don't in any way abuse her. You see the contradictions here in the message itself. All of these contradictions, again, I don't think Hamlet is catching on to them. I mean, he's in a state, right? He's in this highly emotionally charged state. All that he's hearing, all that he's imagining, and so he's not being rational here. He's not thinking. He's not seeing the contradictions in the message here, nor the contradictions that are arising in this particular situation in the Christian code, in the Christian canon. And the ghost says, "Leave her to heaven." And then the ghost bids Hamlet adieu at line 90. Adieu, adieu, adieu. Remember me. And there, that word remember. I mean, that, if anything, is going to persuade Hamlet. We've seen Hamlet's big problem with his mama and with his uncle and with everybody at court is they don't remember his father. They haven't honored his memory. They haven't memorialized him properly. They've already forgotten. Within a month, a little month, they've already moved on. So how could their grief, how could their sorrow have possibly, how could it have possibly been real, been true? It couldn't have been. They've forgotten him. They haven't remembered him. You see the word memory and the word remember. And this is the ghost's final words. And Hamlet is left alone on stage and he cries out in his second soliloquy. Oh, I mean, you can see how moved he is by what he's heard and what he's seen, and all that's been going on in his brain. Oh, all you host of heaven. Oh, earth, what else? And shall I couple hell? So he's calling on all the forces of heaven, all the forces of earth. And now he wonders, right? You see this suspicion rising back in his mind. Should he also call on all the forces of hell? Because he's in such a state here that he's ready. He's ready to take action. He's ready to revenge this murder. Even if this ghost is an actual demon who's come to tempt him, he's ready. He is ready to attack, to kill. And this is the state that we find him in and that we'll return to. We'll leave him here for the moment, but we will leave him in this state because this young man is going to become so distracted, so confused, that he will be drawn step by step. I mean, this is enough to drive anybody mad, but he will be drawn into a kind of madness. And that's where we're going to leave him. And I'm sure I've given you enough reasons to think about. Perhaps I'm drawing you into a kind of madness as well. But you've got lots of reasons to explore here, lots of causal factors to think about. We'll leave Hamlet at the top of this soliloquy, his second soliloquy. Read through that. We'll talk about that before we move to Act 2 in the next lecture. And begone.